and even some parts of the right, that if you were sufficiently harsh in your criticism of the United States, you were demonstrating autonomy in your foreign policy. And then during the Cold War, when the United States took a Manichaean view of international affairs, that tendency was emphasized. But one of the things that Real made perfectly clear was that anti-US sentiment was not a foreign policy. Furthermore, I spent a great deal of time discussing a piece by a Chileno who's not here, Heraldo Munoz, who did a piece which we published in the Latin American Research Review, in which he argued, he had previously published it in Chile, in which he argued against what was called the dependency theory, that no nation is without power. And he criticized dependency because he placed Latin America in a position of zero power and of victimization. He said, no nation is without power. The issue is how you use your power. And of course, it was, as a Chilean, as a Chileno, it was very clear that it's a very small country, a very small population. Its gross domestic product is much smaller than several others and so on. But he said, no, it's how you understand your role in affairs. So the notion of how to be in the world, and specifically the conscious effort to articulate national interest and an independent, or some word, autonomous foreign policy, is at the core of the book. And the people who made that possible are the characters, particularly in the more contemporary chapters. He dicho.
Muchas gracias.
No, al contrario.
Muy bien. Por favor.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank this invitation. First of all, to my friend, Professor Tulchin, who has been seen in Chile by Chileans, by my generation, as one of the deans, one of the most important analysts and participants in the analysis of Latin American US relations for a long time. Therefore, I really felt honored when he called me to say that he wanted me to comment his book. I, of course, want to thank Cynthia for this invitation and to the Wilson Center. And it is also a great pleasure to be with Luigi Einaudi, with whom we have known each other for some time in different adventures, particularly one that will link us forever, which is Haiti. I have to say, first of all, that I enjoyed enormously reading this book, and I believe that it is a great contribution to the study of inter-American relations. I always have had the impression that in the United States, most analysts tend to take particular periods, contemporary periods, without any concept of what was the process that led things to be as they are, without any consideration for the particular history that lies behind the facts that we are analyzing. And this is precisely, this type of analysis is precisely the contrary to what Professor Tulchin does in Latin American international politics, challenging US hegemony. It is clear that the analysis of the region at present times is posed in a historical perspective. Of course, the analysis of its development is succinct. It is extremely dense. Therefore, it is not an easy book to comment, because you have an enormous amount of data and facts accumulated in each page. But it is extremely illuminating of the present behavior of many Latin American countries and of most of what is happening now in the region. Of course, the risk of this perspective sometimes is that you illuminate the broad trends, but you may also get into very polemical observations about historical details. You have to prioritize among an enormous amount of historical data, and sometimes you tend to leave outside the picture events which might seem important in other perspectives, or because your own vision of a particular event might seem loaded or simply wrong to different observers. In my case, I was fascinated by the speed and the accuracy of Professor Tulchin's historical analysis. And in my reading of the book, there are three main questions, or four main questions, that are addressed in the book and that are extremely important. The first is, why was it that these countries in Latin America had such a different perspective of their relation with the outside world than the one forged by the United States since Washington's farewell address? I think that this is a question that occupies a very important first part of the book, and which I would like to refer to. Second, were all the intents of agency impossible during the Cold War? I mean, there were a lot of efforts by Latin American countries to relate themselves to the rest of the world, trying to surpass or evade or turn around the Cold War conflict. What was the amount of success that these, first of all, did these efforts really existed? And if they existed, were they all a failure, or some of them succeeded? A third question I find fascinating in the book is, did the end of the Cold War mark the moment in which the Latin American countries found for the first time their capacity to exert agency? Is it the end of the Cold War? Is it globalization, considered in a more in a broader perspective? What is the impact of globalization in the creation of agency among Latin American countries? Of course, any Latin American like myself, who begins reading a book of this sort, poses himself once again the same question. Can you really talk about Latin America during this period? Did Latin America really exist as such in the 19th century? Or are we talking of different countries with very different characteristics and different state constructions and structures? If one takes agency to mean, as Joe was just saying, a process of decision making, in which a country decides to address its foreign policy towards a democratic procedure, then it is clear that this didn't exist in Latin America. I have, to wonder how democratic was it in this country at the time. But it was probably much more oligarchical than what we would think today. But the point is that I'm absolutely sure that there was no agency in those terms, democratic debate in foreign policy decisions in Latin America. But if we take agency to mean action in defense of national interest, yes, there was agency at the time. Chile is a good case. Diego Portales, who is probably or was probably the founder of the Chilean Republic, decided to invade Peru simply because he thought that the Confederación Perú-Boliviana of Mariscal Santa Cruz in the 1830s threatened the security of Chile. In doing so and winning the war, he confirmed the identity and also the security obsessions of this nation, Chile. This was a very cold-blooded decision. There was nothing at the moment which really threatened Chile. Mariscal Santa Cruz was not threatening to invade Chile. He was just trying to unite Peru and Bolivia. The decision of Chile to attack Peru and prevent, along with a group of Peruvians who were also interested in the failure of Santa Cruz, was a clear decision based on a consideration of national interest. Some others, like the Central American countries, of course, did not and developed just one sole obsession, the United States. Probably they had no other option. Professor Tulchin is also right in his comments about the Monroe Doctrine and its real purpose. It was not an imperialist manifesto. But this did not matter much, because it was read as such from south to north. As most of you, I'm sure, understand Spanish very well, let me read you something that is not very commonly quoted in books in Latin America, because it is a quote of Diego Portales also, who was at the time not even a politician, but a merchant. And he wrote a private letter to a friend, his famous friend Sea, in 1823. In the letter he says, "El presidente de la Federación de Norteamérica, Mr. Monroe, ha dicho, se reconoce que la América es para estos. Cuidado con salir de